Welcome back to Power Breakfast. In our continuing analysis or examination of the insecurity problem in this country, today we want to focus on just the challenge of combating terrorism as well as other security threats from people who should know, from experience and from practice. So we're joined this morning by, on my immediate left, Jonathan Hamaker, a former U.S. Air Force officer who's been involved in combating terrorism, as well as Sasha Nginja, a consultant on security matters who's been involved in training, managing security systems with what we call private security guards. Is that the case? All right, welcome, gentlemen. And Mutegi Njao, my colleague. Let's start with you, Sasha. A lot of the insecurity we witness in this country is being blamed on lapses in our workplaces, social places, that we're not taking sufficient precautions, and therefore there is need to upscale training as well as monitoring of our environment. How serious is this problem from your work experience?
I think it is a challenge that certainly needs to be overcome. I think there are several areas that need to be tackled in a build-up, in terms of setting up structures for training, in terms of setting up basic principles that we're looking at from a training perspective, certainly from your private security company. So that is definitely one of the areas that requires proper thought, much better thought, and really thought with a vision. What is it we're looking at in the short term, in terms of building our capacities, in terms of developing individuals to be able to deal with today's realities. Perhaps a lot of the training that might be happening in private security companies in the region in general, and perhaps even globally, have focused by and large on the security issues from the past. But the world changes very, very quickly, very rapidly, very dynamically, and we need to be able to make sure that those changes are then captured within training, and certainly within the capacity of the individuals who are providing us security. So I think that is one of the key areas that certainly needs to be taken on.
Are we doing enough in terms of, okay, I mean, a lot of companies have hired private guards. People say, these guys are just decorations. Are they able to actually provide any security, in effect?
They definitely do provide some security. I believe that there is still a way to go in terms of upskilling them, but that is, it then forms only a smaller part of a much bigger question. There is in security the concept of security, and there is the concept of safety as well. And security is really the actual amount of security, if you can put it that way, or the various technical measures that are put in place to facilitate and to make sure that individuals are living in a very safe environment. You have then the concept of safety, which takes this slightly further, and it actually speaks about the individual's perception of their security situation. So I believe when we are looking at improving systems, we need to consider both of these particular aspects.
And let me go to a local situation.
Yeah.
Since the beginning of terrorism, every place you go to, you are frisked. And you see guys just doing that, and every supermarket, every place. Do those guys know what they're looking for? Are they trained to use those machines? I mean, I think it's just a waste of time.
They are trained, and it certainly does add one layer of security. It does add an additional layer of security. So it is more beneficial to have someone checking individuals entering a mall, for example, than to have no systems at all. So it is one of the layers of security that I believe actually needs to be in place, but it should not be the only layer. In security, we really talk about various layers. And you put one layer upon another, and there may be different layers, they may be overlapping. One layer covers one area and so forth. And I believe that is what we need to be able to do. So aside from just frisking, we need to do other things to actually keep the issues at a greater distance. So if we are at a mall and I'm checking you as a security officer at a mall's entrance, that is already at the level of the mall. But what am I making sure, what am I doing to make sure that you don't even get to that particular level? And so forth and so on. So I believe we need to make a much better planning, much better structures in place to distance any criminal, any terrorist activities as far as possible away from their targets.
Okay. Well, let's maybe, Jonathan, you want to chip in generally before I even post anything to you. How do you rate our preparedness, security-wise, considering the threat that we face, especially of terrorist nature?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is your assessment like?
As a country, I've heard a lot of criticisms specifically leveled towards the government. From a governmental perspective, your government is doing a very good job in combating these matters of terrorism. The security gap lies in precisely what we've been talking about. It lies in between governments and in between the people. When you enter these businesses, when you go in these schools, the churches, etc., there is a fundamental overall lack of security. For example, in nearly every facility or building I've entered in this country, I've carried some sort of weapon, and it has gone without notice. Maybe because I'm a Zungu, but you know, for whatever reason, yeah. Even for example, I usually carry like a small knife. It just goes unnoticed. They don't check, and many times they're distracted. They're on their phone.
Detecting weapons or things like those include up to knives, or are there things which should be not worry anybody?
They should, because if you're not detecting a knife, then it could easily be a submachine gun. It could easily be a suicide bomber vest. So you have to have very detailed attention to security when it comes to combating matters of terrorism. Otherwise, it will cost you in a big way.
You talk about gaps in terms of okay, what is the best case scenario? What is the best practice looking at it globally, and what do you think ought to apply here? For example, I mean, coming from America, America has been a target of terrorism for years. Yeah. What are the measures that have been put in place that you think could apply here that are not being employed?
Yeah, one thing you can do is random routine security checks. The use of sniffer dogs is widely utilized in America. Nearly everywhere you go, you'll see someone using a sniffer dog. This can be a very competitive practice with combating terrorism, and something that needs to be implemented here on a much wider scale.
But I don't know whether our security forces are up to the standard. If you look at that SUV
yes.
that came from Somalia, that they found with whatever they found there, it is stayed in a police station for a week.
Yes.
And somebody knew what was there, but the police, our police didn't seem to know.
Any government anywhere in the world can always have room to improve in matters of security. This is not without question. But what the news rarely talks about are the classified events and occurrences that are happening every day that do stop terrorists, that are arresting them, otherwise removing them from this country. When you have a group of people who are dedicated to killing you, who spend their whole life thinking of ways to cause harm, it only stands to reason at some point that they may succeed on some level. So this is not a failure of government in every case. It's just one of the downfalls of terrorism.
Well, let's get back to you, Sasha. You have been involved in, worked with different companies. I think is it KK Guards, and there are all these companies that provide security, KK Guards, G4S, and so on. Now you're running your own private security firm. These companies offer training. Is the kind of training being offered commensurate to the needs?
I think in the past it was. A lot of the systems perhaps have been neglected in many of the security companies, and as we had spoken about earlier, there hasn't been necessarily a movement to actually accept and understand what the current situation is. And that is an important move. What perhaps would be able to spur that on is some form of structure within the country, legal boundaries, legal parameters, something set down by the government, along which these companies actually have to follow specific rules of training. I think if we are able to push that particular agenda forward, it will start making a big difference. It also means that you're able to control the situation much better from a bigger perspective. And you can look at employing your private security companies to facilitate and to assist current government capacities. You know, you have thousands of security officers across the country. Those are thousands of areas from which you can actually get certain information, and very useful information. That information can be used in a public intelligence format. And when I say intelligence, I don't mean some covert, clandestine kind of intelligence. Really capacitating our knowledge and understanding. Something that can be pushed forward for all of Kenyans and the public to actually understand, avoid these areas and so forth. And I think that is one aspect that could be looked at. It means also being able to feedback systems and understanding for better training of individuals. I think sometimes we look at security guards from the old school perspective as a public as well, and many of us will still look at them as watches, you know, and that is several decades ago.
Yes.
Yeah? I
What
know.
are they accepted? They are just watching.
and that is the thing, you know. So it is a combined effort.
They just have a rungu, that's all.
Actually, they don't. You'd be surprised. As I was saying, one of the things is security, another thing is safety. And perhaps many of us might not know what goes into training these individuals. They may not be seasoned professionals in terms of the security industry, but they do receive some genuinely decent training and background training. And I think it's a matter of expanding that. I think it's a matter of saying, from a national point of view, how can we use this particular resource best? How can we capacitate these individuals best, and how can then that particular information, those capacities,
in fact, as you say,
feed into a
capacity,
greater
what do you
system?
think ought to be done? I mean, there have been arguments that we need to arm our security guards.
Yeah, like Uganda.
Yeah, like, you know, Uganda has a system that is a combination of both police and the informal security who are armed because they're given training. Is that a way to go? Feasible?
It is feasible if, yeah, a tool, any tool, a pen, a screwdriver, a knife, a gun, is only as useful as the person who is wielding that tool. Yeah. And that is a very important factor to consider. So even if we are all armed here, we may not know how to use that tool. We may not know how to keep it safe. I may have a firearm here and a terrorist walks in, but I don't know how to use that firearm, and when I shoot, you know, it actually backfires on me. So there are those particular aspects that we need to consider. Also, how do I know who the terrorist is? You know, have I been trained enough? Do I have the capacity to understand who that individual is to be able to take that particular issue a bit further? So I think there are that is and it's a big if. So if we are going to arm ourselves, we have to really consider who is going to get those arms, yeah? How much can we train them? And we need to train them to such a level where it's instinctual, yeah? In this particular format, we'll understand very well what it is to be a professional, be it a journalist, be it a teacher in class, be it a security professional, yeah?
Yes, yes.
You really have to get to a level where it's almost a muscle memory, so to speak, yeah? That you're able to react very quickly to a very particular situation.
Yeah.
It means continually developing that capacity on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But it also then means controls within that system. Who do those individuals who are armed report to? What do they report when they fired, and so forth and so on?
Yeah.
So it is
Jonathan,
bigger.
I want you to cut in this. You can add on to what you said, but also as you do that, I want to, if I was to appoint you today, Chief of Security, you know, we have seen accusations of lapses in the Westgate attack. In Mombasa, the Likoni Church attack, there are already fingers being pointed that, look, this thing was known, it was going to happen. Mutegi has just mentioned that the SAF, the Toyota SAF, had been trailed by intelligence up to the police station. So they thought it's in good custody and they'll dismember. And then apparently it took a long time. Anything could have happened. If you are the chief of security, what would be the things you would say, I need this done, you know, from what you see happening?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things, and President Kenyatta has touched on this as well, would be to start by removing corruption. You cannot have security in a country where you have corruption. It's impossible. So you'd start by moving corruption in all these, if there is any, in intelligence factions and in police, etc. Second of all, I think it would be wise to establish a special operations or a special forces command. So I know you already have the equivalent to some special forces, the Riker Squad, GSU, the ATPU, etc. But I think it's invaluable if every service can have a special forces type. So not only do you have a special forces type within presidential security, you have for the Air Force, you have for the Navy, you have for the police, etc. And they work together seamlessly, interagency cooperation, to combat this issue. The argument you'll hear quite frequently is, well, we don't have the money. We don't have the budget to spend on all these various groups. If you fail today to spend money on matters of security, it will cost you far more in the end result. For example, in the United States, after September 11th happened, they created the Department of Homeland Security. This cost the United States billions and billions of US dollars when they could have resolved the issue before it ever happened. So if you can create these special forces units, another argument is, well, we already have some, so they can just handle any problems that we have. That would be no different than saying you can have a doctor in your village, you can have a lawyer, you can have a firefighter, you can have a police person, all in the same person. That's basically what you're saying. So it's important that you have subject matter experts who are qualified across all levels of government to help combat terrorism. So remove corruption, establish a special forces command, and then implement training with the public. The government and public should work together to help combat this issue.
I think one thing you mentioned about American establishment of Homeland Security, when America was attacked in 9/11,
yes,
there were complaints that when they were working, they were not together.
Yes.
Various units worked separately.
Very true.
Then they formed a group that worked together.
Yes.
Kenya, the Americans trying to help that establish that in this country at one time or the other. They even were willing to finance, but there were issues of who is the boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think that system.
How does it work in the U.S.?
If you remember what happened at 9/11, sorry, at Westgate, the military came, the GSU, and of course there was a lot of heat. There was a lot of animosity.
Yes.
In fact, I think some of it had to be dealt after because of the clash. Now, how do you sort out that establishing that unit that work together?
Yeah. This is a problem. This was an issue that occurred at Westgate, and it cannot be denied.
Yes.
They tried to deny it, but you can't deny it was an issue. Okay.
Yeah.
I think this should come from the very highest levels, from the president down, and be like, listen, here is who is in charge if something like this happens again. You have to know who's in charge, or you're wasting your time. And
if a repeat of that is happening another more,
yes.
How do we know the clash will not repeat itself?
Well, my recommendation, well, you don't know until something happens.
But they meant to resolve.
Yes, my recommendation to government would be that you need to do practice scenarios. You need to do real threat scenarios in downtown Nairobi, in Mombasa, and then you need to calculate response times. You should come in by helicopter, by ground, by any means possible, and practice. If such an event were to occur, how do we handle it? Who is in charge? And by practicing these concerns, you can resolve the issue should it happen again in the future.
Well, the government has set up, of course, there was a plan to set up the Nairobi Metropolitan Command of the KDF. You know, you think that is a good solution? I mean, or should the policing ordinarily be left to, no, should the security, basic security, be left to the police as opposed to the military?
Do we need an army in Nairobi?
Right.
Well, how much involvement, how much should be the military's involvement in tackling, say, terrorism at the preventive level?
Sure. From a personal standpoint, governments, civilization should be policed by their police force. That's what their job is to do. Military should be a last resort, but I think they should always be on standby. They should always be on backup, willing to help and support in any way that they can. But typically, a military's role is defense of the country, and internal threats in most countries are handled strictly by police. But it doesn't mean that you cannot work with police and military together seamlessly. You just have to know who's in charge from the beginning. It's very important.
We'll come back to look at the response timelines within, globally the acceptable standards, and because sometimes when we are hit, it takes 2 hours to get there. These challenges of access within the city, urban warfare. But, I see there is a lot of feedback from the public, questions and so on. Kirigo, what is it they're saying?
Yes, David, we have a few of our viewers sending in comments and also, having their own questions on 22422. Remember, if you have any questions for the panelists, get in touch with us, 22422. But for now, I will read one from Sir Nixon Dogere in Kindaruma, who says, is there special training about combating terrorism? I honestly fear loss of lives through mistaken identities and stray bullets out of the shoot to kill order. Then there's Anonymous who says, address the root causes of address the root causes of terrorism only and it will end. Then there's John Kimenyich, who's like, I've not heard of anybody or seen anyone being found by security guards in malls and banks. Do these people know what they're looking for? Yeah, so those are some of the views we're getting in this morning. 22422. Keep sending them to us, and of course we will be sharing them with David Makali together with the panelists, and they'll try and tackle and answer some of your questions.